Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video to conclude the month of July 2023. Though technically I'm still in the middle of a couple of these books, so I'm going into August a little, but I started everything at least in July. So this is me wrapping up my month of reading pretty much, is how I see it. I usually only make 3 AM reading videos a month, but my last one was on vacation and it felt a little bit incomplete. I didn't read very much. I also didn't read an AM reading story from this collection, which is usually my one of my big to-dos of AM reading videos, is I read one short story in this collection. Well, right now I'm reading from CARAMBA, an anthology of Jewish stories from Latin America, edited by Ilan Stavins. So yeah, didn't really feel complete my AM reading schedule without getting to this. So without further ado, I will talk briefly about the next short story I read, which is Love by Clarice Lispector, one of the more, I think, well-known authors in this collection. Although I feel a little iffy about this story. It was meant to be stream of consciousness, and I feel like I'm kind of falling out of love with that genre, and especially the way that she did it, because stream of consciousness is naturally histrionic, and I feel like she didn't actually, give this character enough to be histrionic about. Her character, Anna, is on a tram, and she just has some very generic thoughts about, well, now I'm a mother, and my life makes sense, and I have my bag of groceries here, and then a blind man gets on the tram and is chewing gum, and for some reason this really repulses her, and that sets off a stream of events. Like, first she drops her bag, she makes a noise that makes the tram conductor think he should stop the tram, even though she didn't mean for that to happen, and she breaks her eggs. And that's the stuff, I guess, that makes sense to me, that it would break your calm. Oh my gosh, like, my eggs are broken, and also I have this unwanted attention, and something happened that I didn't want to on this trip home. And I even kind of understand, like, having a weird reaction to somebody, if, I don't know, based on maybe things you don't fully understand. But it just seems like, I don't know, she just, after that, goes into more philosophical thoughts about what's wrong with the world now, and it never seemed deep enough. I felt like if your calm is going to be that broken for the rest of the day, as she goes home and makes dinner and, frets over her family, that but even the fretting over her family seemed kind of vacuous. I just thought, if you're going to be this histrionic, something should be wrong, like, in the back of your mind the whole time. This trigger of the blind man should set things off, like, maybe I'm not as good a person as I thought, and these are the ways that being, like, you're a good person by being altruistic, and I'm not because of XYZ, and also I'm freaking out about something at work or at home, and specifics about it. I mean, I guess when I think about my own, like, being way too self-absorbed and histrionic, that's where my mind would go. I think I wouldn't be caught up in, things that were more vague and general. About the world. I'd be much more, stuck in specific things happening in my life. So I don't know. That's why I guess it didn't speak to me, because I thought, if we're going to go this deep and narrow into a self-absorbed character, there should at least be more character involved. But I don't know. Maybe stream of consciousness actually is a little more divorced from deep character development, because, your thoughts just, come and go. But anyway, those are my thoughts about this story right now. I also talked in my vacation video about listening to the Sassoons by Joseph Sassoon on audio, which I actually hadn't done much of, but I promised that I'd be listening to most of it on my long car ride home, and that's indeed what I did. So I read the Sassoons as part of a Jewish biography project I'm trying to nudge on myself, and I found this book through the most recent National Jewish Book Awards, which happened in January. And this is about a family, a really well-to-do trading family from the mid-19th century into, I guess, the 20th century. They were a Baghdadi Jewish family who left Baghdad due to I think there was a fair bit of anti-Jewish harassment, and they ended up, or the patriarch ended up in Bombay working for the East India Company, and from there things parlayed. He got started in trading businesses, and this patriarch, David, basically used his own sons and also members of the Baghdadi Jewish community to set up various trading houses, like in Shanghai, and this was around the time where China was beginning to open up to foreign trade. And Also, obviously, a big one in Bombay. They dealt with textiles and cotton during around the time, actually, of the Civil War, and when I think U.S. Cotton was in a little bit of flux around that time, since it was, you know, tied in so much to the slave trade. So, like, it talked a little bit about the Civil War, even though these people were, you know, a world away from it. And then they also, especially through China, got deeply involved in the opium trade, and I think that's where a lot of their money and good fortune came from as well. And they, through the East India Company, and then especially through English colonization of India, got more involved in Britain, and started the family started migrating to London and having offices there. And, you know, in part they wanted to, expand their trade westward. They were bringing like Eastern goods to the West, and so forth, but also they were becoming enamored with British aristocracy and, the good life in London. And so it's a book that goes several generations, and even from the first generation after David died and gave his company to one of his sons over the other ones, things were already fracturing, and just a few years later, the Sassoon company broke off into two companies, one with his successor, and then one, the E.B. Sassoon company, under a different son. And so we track members of the families into the 20th century as the business begins to fray a bit. And a lot of that has to do with the family members themselves, that they grow less interested in, actually being part of the business and in, making lucrative trade deals and, getting whatever enjoyment or success out of doing that. And they just wanted to reap the financial successes, and, they had lavish lifestyles by this point, and were less interested in doing the work. And so there were certainly a lot of interesting characters to follow, including businessmen and even businesswomen, although sadly the most successful businesswoman was, of course, railroaded out by her uncomfortable male relatives in the late 19th century. And other than that, there's a lot about assimilation in here. Like, they started with really deep roots. They're Sephardic Jews, Baghdadi Jews, and slowly I think they became, less connected to their own Baghdadi roots, so that, the first few generations really felt a deep connection, and the latter ones not so much. And similarly with religion, the several generations were religious, and some to, I guess, the end of the book, some characters still were religious, whereas others became much more assimilated. First, they'd start marrying into Eastern European or Ashkenazi families, including the Rothschilds, to tell you about their wealth and the status they were in. And then they started marrying more into, Christian families and sort of losing the faith. And one of the most well-known Sassoons, in fact, was a Catholic World War I poet. So there's that. And so I was listening to the novel. It also, not novel, the nonfiction. It also does touch upon a lot of other history, especially how World War I and World War II really upended trade. And so that also played into, I think, the demise of their particular companies. But I guess in a way I found it a little overwhelming, kind of just like trying to keep all of these people straight. And I'm not sure how much of a connection to an overarching arc I feel afterwards. I mean, I guess I get the premise of you know, a family that is in the right place at the right time with the right connections due to their Baghdadi Jewish community, and then how wealth and status and sort of assimilation and decentralization and just world politics take their toll on that. But it's a lot of stuff to cram into one book, too, I think. Another book that does a lot with cramming in various parts of history is Horse by Geraldine Brooks, which I talked about a bit in my last video, because I had, you know, actually read most of it by then. Now, of course, I've finished the novel, so that feels good. And so this is a historical fiction novel which actually fictionalizes real history about a real racing horse, Lexington, who was an antebellum racing horse in the South during the U.S. days of slavery. And it also touches upon some more modern findings, some real history about when Lexington's skeleton was discovered, and when portraits of Lexington were discovered as well that were made by contemporaries of his time, including reference, although I don't think this portrait was ever found, of him being led by his black groom Jarrett, whom Geraldine Brooks assumed, most likely rightfully, was a enslaved person. And so Jarrett and Lexington are really the heart of the novel, where she tries to imagine what Jarrett's life and Lexington's life might have been like. Lexington was a very famous racing horse for just a couple of seasons before his eyesight started to fail, but even after that, he was sent to be like a stud, and then his, you know, his descendants also were well known as race horses. And then in a future timeline, like in 2019, she imagines or reimagines the story about how the skeleton and the portraits were found, and she connects two people together who were involved in those two worlds, an Australian woman working for the Smithsonian named Jess, and then a art historian student named Theo who's studying in DC but is from Lagos. And that story goes much further than, you know, just the historical fact-finding. As they enter a relationship, there's just a lot of commentary about interracial realities and microaggressions, and how I feel like one of the stronger parts of this is the ways that Brooks was able to show through the narration how easy it is for white people to center their own emotions when they're dealing with the discomfort of understanding racism. So I thought that was well done from that perspective. And there was a third storyline in the 50s that tried to bridge things that I didn't really think needed to be there. By that point, I feel like we're kind of losing the thread a little, and, you know, I guess especially since I'm a character reader, it's like too much. And Jarrett and Lexington are really the heart of the story, and at most we can only, you know, have Theo and Jess as a secondary. And the one major thing that happened, obviously, that I didn't talk about in the last time was the ending. And there's the ending of Jarrett and Lexington's story, which I think generally the way it goes makes a lot of sense and seemed pretty authentic and even understated for the realities, versus what happened with Jess and Theo. It was a little more of an abrupt turn, I think. And I have mixed feelings about her ending it this way, because I feel like she went for a dramatic ending, and in a way it kind of took away from the stuff she was talking about before and the things maybe readers could sit with, because suddenly they had to contend with something much more dramatic. And that's my way of trying to skirt spoilers, but overall I really did enjoy this book. And I'm glad I have gotten to it, and now I am down to 3 Geraldine Brooks novels for my backlist reading project, which I will probably be getting to in December. The next book I listened to on audio is The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. I read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell a couple of years ago for the BookTube Prize. And when it comes to historical fiction, I think she's doing something similar here that she did with Hamnet as well. She's taking a real-life character from medieval/Renaissance times and sort of dramatizing their story. And particularly in this case, even more than Hamnet, which is about a death of a child and how that affected Shakespeare, but this one I think is even more dramatic, melodramatic even. It's about Lucrezia de Medici, who's part of the really famous medieval Florentine family, the Medicis. Her father was a Duke of Florence, and she was given in marriage to Alfonso, recently the Duke of Ferrara. And then she died very tragically when she was 16, which was about a year after she started living with him. And I think the general understanding was she might have died of, tuberculosis, which they understood as putrid fever. But even almost immediately, I think there were some rumors that maybe she was poisoned. And in fact, the women in her family didn't do so well. At least 2 of them seemed to be murdered by their husbands for infidelity. So not the greatest track record in a way when it comes to feminist. It feels bad to even joke about that, really, because it's about murdering people. And anyway, in this, O'Farrell is definitely going with the premise that Alfonso decided to murder his wife, largely because she was unable to get pregnant and he was worried about his line. Of course, it is highly implied that it is he who was sterile, which is also sort of, backed by history because he had other wives and never had any children, known children, legitimately or otherwise. So anyway, that's where we're going, and it's actually a dual timeline in a way. The first timeline is very following her in a sort of granular way on the last night of her life, from when she realizes he will try to kill her to her dealing with that. And then the second storyline is basically about her life starting at conception up to that point. And it's very propulsive and sort of, purple dramatic reading. But at the same time, I think there's a lot that isn't so great about it. I think in my Goodreads review, I referenced a professional review talking about how, O'Farrell gets way too indulgent when it comes to over describing everything, like with multiple descriptions all the time. And in general, I do feel like Lucrezia's character was uneven, kind of based on what she was needed to be for the plot. Sometimes she was like overly onerous as a child and like throwing tantrums and, obviously had a loud and outsized personality, and then at other times she was very quiet and reserved, and sometimes she was like the smartest person in the room, and at other times she was deeply naive. And as somebody who's a character reader, I do like complicated, nuanced characters, that she shouldn't just be, one shade of anything. Nobody should be smart all the time or whatever. But it just felt like to me that the way she came off was that O'Farrell always wanted to draw her in a specific light of goodness, and so sometimes that meant her being, sort of the badass, and sometimes that meant her being the innocent, or I don't know. It just, it felt a little convenient for me. I mean, the truth is, when it came to characterization, everything's a little good versus evil in this, obviously. I mean, maybe it's understandable. We're talking about a man who decides, well, screw it, she hasn't gotten pregnant in a year, and after I've, been abusive to her in other ways as well, so he can understand why he comes off as unlikable, and just, a bad person in pretty much all respects that we know him. But I do think, in a way that, it just flattens the story a bit. It was propulsive to read. You want to see Lucrezia win against these forces that are very much against her in a time period where it's very difficult for women to, get ahead of the misogyny around them. But, you just take a step back and you realize it's kind of a soap opera. And so those are my thoughts. So I kind of rated it highly because I really enjoyed the experience of listening to it, but I do feel like in terms of a character study, it has its drawbacks, so that's where I go. But speaking of character studies I really enjoyed, this is my page 112 tag pick, which I finally read. It's called The Last Cruise by Kate Christiensen. In fact, I'm kind of glad I didn't read it on vacation because it's sort of the anti-vacation book after all. Like, even though it's about a cruise, which lots of people go on for fun, Christiensen has far more complicated feelings about the whole cruise industry, and let's just say things don't go well for her characters on this cruise. In fact, one of my friends is about to go on a cruise this month, and I very deliberately did not tell her about this book. So anyway, this is the story of the Queen Isabella. It's a cruise ship that was, created in the 50s, and now, like, I think in the 2010s, she's about to retire, and the cabaret company that owns her, they do their last hurrah, a cruise going from California to Hawaii for about a week. They have a very kind of a limited list for passengers, and only people like 15 and up. There's no Wi-Fi. It's supposed to sort of like evoke that magical, nostalgic age of the 50s or something. And we are following three characters, none of whom are paying passengers. In fact, one of them, Mick, is a sous chef, and he's sort of like a middle management sort of guy on the ship. Then Christine, I'd say arguably, is our main character of the three. She is a farmer's wife from Maine, but she used to be a journalist in New York, and her friend, a fellow journalist from New York, Valerie, is going on this cruise on behest, I think, of her publisher or her employer. She is trying to write a book about the third world employees of cruise ships and I think other industries, and of course here she's trying to get in with the employees of the cruise ship. And the final person is technically another employee in a way, a different class. Her name is Miriam. She is from Tel Aviv, and she is part of a string quartet, and their string quartet is friends with one of the owners of the Queen Isabella, and they're on board, obviously to provide some of the entertainment. And so we follow these characters around, and frankly, for much of the novel, there's not a lot of external plot, and I was quite thrilled with it. In fact, honestly, I kind of think I would have, and I know I'm kind of alone here, I would have been okay, I assume, with a book where basically the external action is they go on a cruise and they come back, and all of the drama and conflict and character beats are all internal, because all three of these people have stuff going on in their lives, like real stuff, about their relationships and questioning where they are in their lives with their careers or with their aging processes and with their romantic entanglements. And so I feel like there was enough there, and it was detailed and nuanced, and that would have been enough to hold me. And also, because we were in these different parts of the ship, there was a lot of great commentary about the realities of working conditions on these ships, and how the cruise companies, use their workers and don't pay them well enough, and are often looking for like exploitative cutbacks. And so there is a big subplot here about a walkout on the ship, because most of these people, especially under Mick, a lot of people who are lower tier than him, are having their contracts abruptly canceled, and they're staging a walkout to get the cabaret company to talk to them. And the fact that the external plot comes at the exact same time as that not only is convenient, like, oh, of course, the exact time that the walkout is happening is when, there's an electrical fire and the ship is dead in the water and blah, blah, blah. Of course, it's convenient that that all happens at once, and then it also takes away from that interesting messaging as well. Although Christiensen is also trying to, use it to talk about other ways that the company has cut corners, and how, they're dead in the water, and unfortunately they're like stuck out there for a week, and there's not much happening by way of rescue, and very little happening by way of, getting some food flown in and that sort of thing. It does give the characters, I guess, a little more time to get to know each other, because they didn't before then. But and in all honesty, it didn't stop me from giving this 5 stars. I just, the character stuff was strong enough for me that I was already deeply invested. There is another abrupt ending in this one too, which I think also speaks to Christiansen's thoughts about cruise ships. So I think other people are less forgiving of some of the flaws of this novel than I am, but I thought it was well written, and I just loved the character explorations going on here and what it says about them individually and what it says about the world that they are involved in, about the cruise ship world, and also their own particular backgrounds versus the universal themes about what people want to feel good in their lives. And so it really worked for me, and I'm just very happy I got to it. A book that worked less well for me is SARAHLAND by Sam Cohen. These are short stories that I picked up in part because of my Try a Story tag that I do annually on this channel. And I think by the time I got to this, I guess a couple stories in, I kind of realized it really wouldn't be for me. The stories are too experimental for my tastes. I keep like flitting in and out of them, like, oh, this is an interesting passage, but then I'd sort of lose my way because there's not enough of a thorough line when it comes to characters, and after a while it seems to be more about a message than so anyway, these these stories are about characters named Sarah, and that's like the overarching message is like what it means to be human through Sarahs, which, you know, in a Abrahamic religion way takes us back to origin stories, because Sarah is our first matriarch, and in fact one of these stories retells a sort of part of the biblical Sarah's history and her relationship with her maidservant Hagar, and with her two sons, her biological one and the one that is Hagar's biological son. All of these stories tend to have a lot of queer themes to them as well. The way these particularly women sort of relate to each other, it's just very niche, I think. You know, they are people who are deeply involved in understanding the world through fandom or through sort of leftist philosophies. And I think I struggle with it a little because there's not enough realist content. Things kind of immediately go off the rails into the surreal in a lot of these stories. And I tend to have more trouble connecting to them as they become more about these ideas than about the characters themselves, I think. Although I do, it's especially like seeing how fandom interacts with characters, and maybe some of those are some of my more favorite stories. Anyway, I still have to write my Goodreads review for this one, in fact, so hopefully I can use some of this rambling to get myself to more concrete thoughts to put down there. Now I am in the middle of reading The Baron by Matthias B. Lehmann, which is another one of my Jewish biographies, and in fact is very similar to the Sassoons because it's about a dynamic Jewish family that started prospering in the 1800s. But this one, instead of being a Sephardi family from Baghdad originally, these are an Ashkenazi family originally from Germany. And the family, in fact, got their start as court Jews, which is actually, I think, a phenomenon I'd like to study a little bit more. And a court Jew is basically the precursor to bankers who lent money and helped out noble families, and often then became scapegoats when something went wrong with finances. But then that's like early modern period, and then by the 1800s, we're moving into the Enlightenment, and also for some Jews in the West, emancipation, that they became somewhat full citizens of their countries as nation states started to form. And from the court Jew background, some families, like the Hirsch family, did go into something more, you know, traditional banking as we understand it today. And like, for example, the main character of this nonfiction, Baron Maurice de Hirsch, obviously by this point they have a title that comes, I think, actually from moving to France, not from Germany. They've by this point moved into France, and his big claim to fame was helping to finance railroads, particularly trying to link the Ottoman Empire to the West. And so this has to do too with trade, like with the Sassoon family, and also about perceptions of the world, especially I think for wealthy people who had the means to travel by train and had a lot more access suddenly to different parts of the world. And it really, I think, informed how they viewed the world and how, you know, even though nation states were growing, I think the idea is that with a train, a lot of people had access to all parts of Europe and even to parts of Asia much more easily than they had in the past. And so that's, I think, part of the commentary that the author is trying to go into. Then he's also, you know, going into the family life of the Hirsches. And the Hirsch family is somewhat synchronous with the Sassoon family. In fact, there was one brief reference to the Sassoons so far in the book. And the Hirsch family, I think, is a little earlier in their assimilation track than the Sassoons. Even Maurice de Hirsch at this point is not religious at all. And there's a lot of interesting commentary here about how he views his Jewish identity, and it goes into sort of the complications, I think, of how difficult it is to talk about when most people view identity through sort of a Protestant mindset, whereas Judaism is not just a religion. There's also ethnic ties as well, and those ethnic ties also lead to, you know, disparate Jewish communities to a certain degree, although sometimes these particular communities have biased feelings toward one another. And I think those, like the Sassoons and now the Hirsches, who became aristocracy in their own rights and became more assimilated into the European upper classes, started to have sort of Orientalist and anti-Eastern perspectives, including of those Jews sometimes. It's also interesting to note that they became, the Jews became aristocratic around the time when the aristocracy was starting to fade anyway, and they still, you know, faced anti-Semitism from some quarters about being allowed a seat at the table. And I think that's more or less where I am right now with Hirsch. Later in his life, he always gave to Jewish philanthropic causes, less religious causes, but more about sustaining the bodies of Jews, like their physical well-being in various places. And I think he's particularly going to, at the end of his life, take a look at the Russian Jews, who are sort of, when it comes to Hirsch, he has this deep belief so far that if Jews assimilate into Christian society, then they can survive. And the Jewish question, which basically has always been, you know, how do we, from a Christian standpoint, it's we don't like these people, how do we get rid of them? And from a Jewish standpoint, it's how do we stop being persecuted against? So Hirsch always goes into, you know, more emancipation, more assimilation, but with Russia, and the Russian Jews did not have that luxury. They never were full citizens. And so I think that changed his outlook a bit. And the Russian Empire is where some of the most violent anti-Jewish pogroms were happening, especially around his life. So yeah, that's where I am with this. I'm invested so far, and I certainly hope to be finishing it soon because I have a lot of August reading to get to as well. And the final book I'll talk about, I can't actually talk about much. It's How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamastu, which I am mostly finished listening to on audio. I started it in July, and now in August it is officially part of the BookTube Prize Fiction Finals that I'm an official judge for. So I really shouldn't say much about it, even though it's supposed to be part of my July reading when I wasn't reading for the BookTube Prize. Now it's August, and we're officially into the finals round, and I feel like I shouldn't say much about it. Because as a judge, the thing about the BookTube Prize is that judges are supposed to keep quiet about their opinions on our ballots of books so as not to influence any of our fellow judges, and that we're all working independently. So there we have it. But on that note, I will be back on this channel in my next video to talk about the BookTube Prize and the finals ballot that I am reading for, and give some thoughts about that ballot, so stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, I've been rambling a lot longer than I thought I have been, I think, on this video, so good luck with editing, future self. I hope the rest of you are enjoying your transition from July into August, reading and otherwise. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.